So we are on to the next stage. So once you have done all the quilting, what you need to do is just cut around the shape of your purse or pouch. So that's marked on the fabric for you. So you just need to, with all three bits together, just cut around so you've got that shape. Now this is where your pins are going to be needed. So we are going to lay the binding round the edge of the purse and pin it in place before we stitch it. So this is the right side of the binding, so with the folded edges that go like that, and you're going to lay it on top of the purse, the patterned side of the purse, and pin it in place so that we can stitch it. So to go around the corners, you just need to manipulate it. So you can see here, you're going to have a little fold, so that will get sewn, but just pin it in place, and then we're going to do that the whole way round. We're going to do a running stitch on this first crease line of the bias binding, which is the first step of stitching the bias binding onto the pouch. So we're all pinned in place and we've gone around, folded the bias binding. This is all in one big length of bias binding. You don't need to cut it. So we're doing our running stitch, which is just down and up and down and up, using the pleat, the fold of that bias binding as your line, so it's really easy to see where you need to go. And then as we get to this corner, we're leaving the corner free, but we're stitching around the lines. We're going all the way up there, can do a little stitch over this little bit, but this bit needs to be left free so that we can flip it over and do the next side. Got caught on my pin. I'm just going to do a little stitch there and hold it back, and then another little stitch there. So that's secured it to your purse, but we haven't sewn the corner in. And then just keep going until you reach the end, and then I will show you the next step. So then we're going to flip over, take out your pins, and this is going to require an iron probably to press the bias binding into place. So especially around the curve, you'll want to use an iron to get that. This has been pre-pressed, so don't think that you're just going to flip it around and it's just going to magically sit like that. So now we've got that, take off any of these little edges, just snip those off and press it so it sits nice and flat. And then we are going to use, I'm going to show you how we use ladder stitch then to close this gap, but to do it invisibly so that you don't see the stitching. So now we're going to do the ladder stitch. So I've got one strand of thread again, and I've put a knot in the end. So the key thing about this is that we are coming up through, we're joining together the bias binding and the lining of the purse. So you want to come up with your needle at the edge, the top edge of that fold, but don't come through onto that side, otherwise you'll be able to see the stitch. So the idea is that it's an invisible stitch. So this is point on your instructions so that you can hopefully relay them to what I'm doing here. I've just come up through point A and then down, I'm going to go down through the lining at point B. So I'm just catching the fabric there and going through the top of that, going along. And that's point C, and then I'm going to go down, and that's D, and then going through the binding, don't go all the way through it. This is fiddly, sorry. And then up, this is point E. Back down through the lining. So you kind of go down through a bit of fabric and then along and under. So I'm coming up at point G, and then going back down at H. So going down, but not through both pieces of the bias. And then this is I. So you see the ladder forming there, and I'll be able to pull it tight. I'm just going to go back down on this side. You'll get into a rhythm because you basically go down through the fabric and then along. I'm going down, catching that top layer of the binding and along. Just checking it. Oh no, I came out. So I'm going to pull that tight. Let's hope this magic works. There we go. So I've pulled my stitches tight, and that has created a really lovely close between the lining and the bias binding that you can't see, which is amazing. So basically you just keep doing that all the way around the edge of the purse. So I'm just going around my curve. So I've done that, I've just carried on doing the ladder stitch exactly as we were doing it on the straight line, and I'm going to pull it tight. So I would only do an inch and a half of stitching before you pull it tight, just because I think that it could get tangled, the thread could get tangled. And you don't want to pull it too tight, you don't want to kind of make it pucker. But yeah, I've just done that bit of my curve, and now I'm going to carry on. So you definitely will start to get into a rhythm with this as you go, as you join the two pieces of fabric together. The trickiest bit is catching, the one layer of bias here. So you kind of put your a thumb under it or your finger under it, and then you can bring your needle up there and get it on this edge, on this creased edge, so that it pulls down nice and tightly and gives you a lovely close, but you don't want to go through to be able to see that. So that, I think I'm making it look trickier than it is just because I'm trying to do it on the camera for you, but definitely it's very satisfying. So I've got my thumb under there just so that I probably use a thimble for this, if you've got one, so that you don't stab your thumb. And then pull that tight, just gently pull all those stitches. There we go. And then I'm just going to keep going all the way around doing that. You will probably run out of thread at some point going around doing this ladder stitch, so just tie a little knot by going back in on yourself, on the lining. I'll do it on the lining. And then snip that off. And then just start again. Thread your needle and start from where you left off. So I'm coming to the end where I'm joining the two ends of the bias. So I'm going to just treat this as if this was my lining fabric, so that I can kind of join the two bits together. So that's, I'm going to go up here, just as I have been doing, through the top of the bias. And then I'm going to go again, instead of going through the lining, I'm going to go through the top of the bias. Pull that through, so this is my last one. Now, so I'm just coaxing that top layer of bias round, and we're going to finish it off. So I'm just going to pass my needle through the lining, both bits of binding. I'm going to finish off with a little knot. I'm going to go through twice and then through the loop. I'm going to do that again. Just to be sure. So now you just need to give it another quick press, trim off your threads. So if you want to make the needle book version, you need to just make sure your piece of felt fits the pouch like that. And then I've got one strand of thread again, but you could probably use 2 or 3 for this actually. I'm just going to come up through the felt and just snip off that little end, and then we're going to want to just capture again the first layer of lining with the needle so that it doesn't come through. on the other side. So I'm just pushing my needle down, feeling until I can feel that I've caught that first layer of fabric. So, you know, it doesn't matter, obviously, if you catch the wadding, that's fine. You just don't want to come through onto that side. And then I'm going to do a whole line of stitches. To the end, and I will, just to be sure, I'm going to go back as well and stitch it that way. But that is, it's as simple as that. Adding your little bit of felt. And then to make the little coin purse version, you just need to pin your sides together. And then we're using ladder stitch again. So hide your thread in the middle here, just catch that first, sorry, you didn't see that, catch the first bit of fabric, and then I'm going to trim off that end. And then we're using the same technique to close up. So I'm going to come across and go under the bias. Back to the top. Over to this side and through the bias. And I'll just show you that. So then again, like we did, you just pull it tight and you've got that lovely little closing, but you can't see any stitches. So just keep going all the way there and do the same on the other side. So we have included some poppers for you, and you've got a few, so this is a nice little addition to your sewing book. So you put the popper where you want it. I've put it kind of like 1/2 centimetre down from the binding, and then just go around a couple of times. If you had some black thread, you might want to use black thread, but I'm using the white. So just sew 1 stitch through each of the little holes, and then you could go round again just to secure that. Make sure it's not going to go anywhere. And then you're going to want to work out where the top end of your popper wants to go. So the way I've done it is I'm just using a pin and folding it over, and then bringing my pin through where I know the middle of that popper is. Can you see that? So that I can tell that if I stitch my popper with this pinhole as the center, then I will be in the right position. So I'm going to move that there. So that's my center position for the other side of the popper to go. So I'm just going to stitch that on and then take the pin out. So that's just a little way of knowing where to stitch your popper. So that is our little fabric purse done, and I will be back with a little tutorial for the stitched hoop.